going to be doing something a bit different. Let's get into this video and let's dissect the Who Wants to Be a Millionaire cheating scandal.
I was hanging with you and then I realized I didn't think it was true. I was surprised when I found out I'd fallen for you.
So the Who Wants to Be a Millionaire cheating scandal, in case you're unfamiliar with what happened on a popular game show in the UK, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, where basically Charles Ingram, who we're going to speak about in a minute, was found guilty of cheating on the show and was actually charged with a criminal offence. So this was like pretty serious at the time. So in order to look into this cheating scandal a bit more, we need to know the rules of the game show. So in order for a contestant to actually get onto the game, they have to play fastest finger first, which is where a few contestants all play a round where they have to put 4 things in order of what they happened, or backwards order, or sometimes words in order in a sentence, things like that. So there's usually 5 or 6 contestants sitting there waiting to play the game when another contestant is sat in the hot seat. And the hot seat is in front of the presenter, Chris Tarrant. So when you're in the hot seat, you have to answer 15 questions to get £1 million. So you're answering multiple choice questions and there's 4 possible answers. So 50-50 divides this by 2. There's phone a friend, where you can phone a friend, or ask the audience, where it tells you who in the audience thought what, how many people thought this was the right answer. So I think it's important to mention here that this game show was huge. It started in 1998 and it just became hugely successful. So now that we've discussed the show, we need to talk about the Ingrams who were accused of cheating on the show. Now, in the public, the Ingrams, Diana and Charles, were quite respectable. They were middle class. Charles was a major in the army. Charles's wife Diana and her brother Adrian Pollock had an obsession with game shows. So Adrian and Diana were part of something known as the Syndicate, which gave people tips on getting onto the show. They were pretty much a group of people who were like Adrian and Diana. They loved game shows as much as they did. And Adrian and Diana wanted to be on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, and they actually built a fastest finger first machine in order to give them that advantage on getting into the hot seat. And Adrian and Diana actually both did go on the show. Adrian went on it a few times and lost in the fastest finger first round, and when he finally made it into the hot seat, I think it was actually mentioned that he'd been there many times before. And Adrian won £32,000 when he was on the show, and Diana won exactly the same. She was on the show after Adrian and won £32,000. So then Charles got on to Who Wants to Be a Millionaire and lost at the fastest finger first round. They basically got him back into the hot seat again, this syndicate. We need to find out what went wrong here that someone was convicted of a criminal offence. So the first night Charles is on the show, he sits in the hot seat on September 9th, 2001. So on this night, Charles reaches £4,000, but he'd used 2 of his lifelines. The producers didn't think he was going to be on that long. You know, everyone thought that he'd take the money or he'd be gone really quick. So in Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, this happens sometimes where the show is on for 60 minutes. Now the contestant before Charles had run for about 45 minutes. So by the time Charles got to the £4,000, the show had ended for the night and they had to come back the next day. So one of the members of the syndicate, which I mentioned before, was called Whittock. And Whittock was due to be on the show the next day in the fastest finger first round. Charles and Diana knew Whittock because of the syndicate, and after Charles had finished for the night, Diana phones Whittock and has a 5-minute phone conversation with him. Now, Diana's always stated that this phone conversation was just, hello, we heard you're going to be on the show tomorrow, we're going to be there too, Charles is playing, we're excited to see you, type of thing. But the court looked at this phone call in a completely different way, which we will get back to later. And what you need to know about Whittock is he had a persistent cough. Now, on the second day of the game, this is when things start to get a little bit strange. So Charles is back in the hot seat, and whenever he's being given a question, he's answering really erratically, strangely. He's flipping between one answer to another. He's saying it might be this, it might be this, it might be this, it might be this, but I think it's this, and then changing his mind like quickly. And it's erratic and it's unusual for the producers, who just think this man is behaving super strangely. So it appeared that whenever Charles was reading out these answers a bit erratically, someone from the audience would cough whenever he read out the right answer. And even at one point there was a cough heard and then a no straight after it.
SYNDICATE Berlin.
So backstage, the producers are getting really concerned. They catch on to this coughing really quickly, and Charles wins the £1 million jackpot.
You just won €1 million!
Chris Tarrant, the show host, hands over the check. Everything's normal, and he heads to Charles and Diana's dressing room to have a glass of champagne with them, which he does with many of the show's winners. You know, he's excited for them. And when he's outside the dressing room, he hears an argument between Charles and Diana. But after he enters, he says everything was normal. They seemed like two people who seemed like they'd won £1 million. So while this was happening, the producers reviewed the tape and they found that they heard an unnatural amount of coughing from Whittock and sometimes even Charles's wife. So what they did is they stopped the £1 million check and handed the matter over to the police. So Charles was then charged with, by the police, procuring the execution of a valuable security by deception. So this charge, from what I gather, is very similar to fraud. So now we're at the trial, and the trial lasted a whole of 4 weeks. So Larry Whitehurst, he had been a contestant on the show previously, and he was due to play fastest finger first after Charles Ingram, as Whittock was. So they were sat close together, and he said that he heard the unnatural amount of coughing and immediately thought that cheating was happening. In Whittock's evidence, it was said that he had a mix of hay fever and dust allergy, which caused excessive coughing for his whole life. And his defence based their whole argument on this. They said, why would the Ingrams trust someone who was liable to cough at any time to cough when a right answer was called out? However, the prosecution looked at it very differently, and they commented that when Whittock was in the hot seat after Charles, after he won his fastest finger first round, his coughing miraculously
disappeared.
But Whittock just said he drank several glasses of water before he went on, because often water helped him a lot. And part of his defence was that he was a consistent loser on game shows. He's been on many game shows before and not done that well in them, so why would the Ingrams again trust him? So after this, the Ingrams were found guilty. Charles and Diana were both given hefty fines. They were given suspended sentences, and Whittock was also fined and given a suspended sentence. Okay, so now we know what happened on the show, we know all about the Ingrams, and we know what happened at the trial. But there are many inconsistencies, shall we say, in which a lot of people think the Ingrams might actually be completely innocent. So the only known conversation that Whittock had with the Ingrams was on Charles's first night, that 5-minute phone conversation with Diana. And the defence pretty much said, how would have this plan been hatched? In these 5 minutes, there was no evidence of any other conversations. Also, which was the defence's whole argument, which is pretty much a strong argument. Why would the Ingrams ask someone who had a cough, a persistent cough, to cough when the right answers were given? And people are known to cough at unconscious triggers. So there is a theory that Whittock's cough during the right answers were down to nerves or was involuntary. There was many jurors and people in the public gallery who were consistently coughing, and at one point the judge even had to threaten to remove people from the courtroom. And a lot of people say, well, yeah, but Charles was chewing over answers for a long time, and Charles has consistently said that it's a good method of gameplay. In the audience, people were heard shouting no. People gave triggers to the right answers. So Charles has always said him chewing over answers was just to see whether it gauged a bad reaction from the audience. And in the clip I played earlier where you hear the cough and someone saying no, this could have just been anyone in the audience who was just saying no like everyone else would when a wrong answer was given. And let it just be mentioned that in Christopher Tarrant's evidence, who was sat so close to Charles, he said he heard no coughing, he heard nothing unusual. And the tapes that we've watched, the tapes that were played in court, were actually tapes that were, I don't want to say doctored, but kind of were. The coughs from Whittock were enhanced in order for the jury to be able to hear them better. And I don't know if that's just because the camera didn't pick up as much as a good sound, but it seems a bit unfair to me that this happened. And I know Charles appealed his case and it was denied, so obviously the judges in the Court of Appeal didn't think that was grounds of appeal. I can't say for sure whether I think they're innocent or not, but I think there was definitely something in that case which could indicate that they might not have been guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. And I think a lot of the public had already kind of decided their guilt before they even got to a courtroom. So I just want to say a huge thank you for watching this video. I really hope you liked it. See you next time. Bye.